The street was quieter than usual that afternoon, but the lingering smells of baked bread and roasted coffee still clung to the corners of the small town market. The sun was starting its slow descent behind the buildings, painting the sky in muted orange and gold. People were busy walking home from work, some chatting in small groups, others hurrying past, lost in their own thoughts. Among them, a young girl moved cautiously, her steps hesitant, her small bag slung across one shoulder. Her clothes were worn, the edges frayed from too many days without proper care. She looked around nervously as she walked, her eyes flicking from stall to stall, hoping not to be noticed, yet needing something more than the cold air brushing against her face. She had not eaten properly in over a day. Not because she didn't have somewhere to go, but because life had suddenly become unpredictable. Her family situation had changed months ago, slowly, almost silently, until she found herself alone and responsible for her own survival. The hunger gnawed at her stomach in waves, sharp and insistent. But it was not just the physical hunger that weighed on her, it was the hunger for hope, for something to remind her that life could still hold small miracles. She stopped near a small cafe that always smelled of cinnamon and sugar, the kind that made people pause in their busy lives just to breathe it in. The windows were clean, reflecting the fading light, and inside, a few customers sat quietly, sipping warm drinks, chatting softly. She looked through the glass for a long moment. She didn't have money, and she certainly didn't have a plan. But she had a gift, something she hadn't fully understood herself until recently: music. Her fingers itched to touch a piano, even if only for a moment. Her hands had learned songs from her childhood, melodies that her mother used to hum late at night when the world felt too heavy. Each note she remembered carried a memory, a warmth, a tiny spark of comfort. And now, standing outside the cafe, she wondered if anyone would even notice her talent, if she could make someone care enough to share something as simple as a warm meal. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice soft but clear, as she addressed the young man sweeping the cafe's entrance. "Excuse me," she said, her words trembling slightly. I don't have any money, but I can sing a song if you could spare some food." The man froze. He glanced at her, his eyes briefly scanning her small frame, the dirt on her shoes, the worry etched into her face. For a moment, he looked unsure what to do. Then, with a shrug that could have been curiosity or dismissal, he leaned back against the doorway. "A song, huh?" he asked, his voice low. "Well, okay. One song. But make it worth it, kid." Her heart leaped. Relief washed over her in a warm wave, and she nodded eagerly. She didn't care if her voice shook or if her hands trembled. This was a chance to be seen, if only for a few minutes. She stepped inside, and the air immediately felt warmer, filled with the scent of baked bread and freshly brewed coffee. The chatter of customers faded as she moved toward the corner where an old upright piano sat, slightly out of tune but still inviting. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating for just a moment. She had never performed for anyone outside her small world before. The thought of strangers watching her made her stomach twist. Then she remembered why she was here. Hunger was allowed, demanding presence, but so was hope. And so she pressed the first key. The sound was soft, fragile, but it carried through the cafe in a way that made people pause mid-sentence, mid-sip. Her fingers moved almost instinctively, flowing across the keys in a pattern she didn't consciously think about. The song started slow, tender, almost like a whisper, but as she continued, it grew. Each note seemed to carry her story: the loneliness, the struggles, the quiet determination not to give up. Customers began to notice. Some looked up from their drinks, some stopped mid-conversation, drawn by the unexpected beauty of her music. The man who had agreed to let her sing paused in his sweeping, tilting his head, as if he were hearing something extraordinary for the first time. For a moment, she forgot the hunger, the worry, even the uncertainty of what would happen after the song. She was lost in the music, and the way it connected her to something larger than herself. The melody carried a kind of magic, one that didn't need applause or attention. Yet, quietly, she felt the weight of eyes on her, watching, listening, absorbing. When the last note faded, there was a pause. A long, pregnant silence that felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, softly, someone clapped, and then another. Soon, the entire cafe was filled with the sound of warm, gentle applause. She looked up, astonished, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. The man at the entrance smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. "Wow," he said, almost to himself. I didn't expect that." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." He handed her a plate of food, simple but generous. Warm bread, some cheese, a little fruit. Her stomach growled even before she took the first bite, but she hesitated, looking around. The smiles of the customers, the gentle nods, the quiet admiration, they made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance, recognition. As she ate, she realized something remarkable. People didn't need to know her story fully. They didn't need to know the struggles, the days of hunger, the nights of tears. Her music spoke for her. It carried everything she could not put into words. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of loneliness lift just a little, replaced by a quiet sense of possibility. Yet even in that warmth, a thought lingered. If one song had done this, if one small act had changed the atmosphere in a cafe for a few minutes, what might she be capable of if she allowed herself to dream bigger? The idea was frightening. Dreams were risky, they could be shattered easily. And she had learned the hard way that life didn't hand out second chances. But for the first time, she wondered, maybe some doors could open if she just dared to step forward. The cafe settled back into its normal rhythm, the customers returning to their drinks and conversations, but something had shifted. She had shifted. The man who had given her the food nodded at her again, this time with a hint of respect in his eyes. "You've got talent, kid," he said quietly. "Don't waste it." She nodded, unsure what to say. Words felt inadequate. Yet the music that had flowed from her earlier seemed to hum inside her still. A gentle reassurance that she was capable of more than survival. She finished her meal slowly, savoring every bite, and then quietly left the cafe. Stepping back into the fading light of the afternoon, the streets looked different now, not because anything had changed outside, but because something had shifted inside her. Every face she passed, every sound she heard, felt sharper, more alive. The world seemed less like a place to hide from, and more like a place where she might belong, even if just in small moments. As she walked, she kept thinking about the piano, the feel of the keys under her fingers, the way the music had seemed to ripple through the cafe, touching people she didn't even know. It lingered in her mind like a whisper, reminding her of a truth she had almost forgotten. Talent was not something to hide, and beauty could be found even in the simplest acts. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where her next meal would come from, or if anyone would listen to her music again. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a spark of something she thought had gone out forever. Hope. And as she walked toward the horizon, where the sun was slowly disappearing, she felt it in her chest, a quiet, steady beat, like the echo of a song that refused to end. Little did she know, this moment, this small act of singing for a meal, would be just the beginning of a journey that would test her, inspire her, and eventually reveal a hidden brilliance that no one, not even she herself, had expected. But for now, it was enough to breathe in the cool evening air, to feel the warmth of a meal, and to let the music inside her hum quietly, waiting for the next note. And that is where her story paused for a while, in that fragile, beautiful space between survival and discovery, hunger and hope. A moment so ordinary yet so extraordinary that it could change everything. The evening had settled into a quiet calm, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The young girl walked slowly, her small bag swinging at her side, her mind still humming with the music she had played in the cafe. Every step felt lighter than it had in weeks, as if the melody inside her had lifted some of the weight she had been carrying. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility. Fragile but alive. That night, she found a quiet corner in a small park. The benches were empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the faint hum of the city beyond seemed distant, like a world she had just stepped into. She took out a notebook she carried everywhere, one that was more ragged than her clothes, and wrote down the notes she had played earlier. She scribbled melodies, fingerings, little reminders to herself about how a song should feel, rather than just how it should sound. As she wrote, she thought about the faces in the cafe, the man at the door, who had seemed skeptical at first, the customers, who had stopped mid-conversation to listen. Their eyes had held something she hadn't expected. Recognition. Not fame, not praise, just acknowledgement. They had seen her, not the ragged clothes, not the hunger, but the music inside her. That realization made her heart swell, with a mixture of pride and fear. Could she really take this further? Could she step into a world where her music mattered more than her survival? She didn't have to wait long for her chance. The next day, she passed a flyer on a lamppost near the same market she had wandered through. It was a small poster, bright but simple, announcing an open stage at a community center. Anyone could perform, it said, no matter age or experience. There was no mention of auditions or fees, just a space and a chance to be heard. Her heart raced as she read it. The idea of performing in front of strangers again filled her with both dread and excitement. The memory of applause from the cafe was still vivid, still warm, and yet the thought of a larger audience, a formal stage, made her stomach twist with nerves. She paused on the sidewalk, biting her lip, thinking about whether she could do it. Finally, she made a decision. She would go. She would play. She didn't know what would happen, and she didn't know if anyone would care, but she had a gift that had been waiting to be noticed. And for once, she was willing to take the risk. The days that followed were a whirlwind. She spent every spare moment practicing, refining the pieces she knew, experimenting with new melodies she had only dreamed of. Some nights, she struggled to keep her hands steady. Hunger and fatigue weighed heavily on her, but each time she pressed her fingers to the keys of a borrowed piano in the community center or a quiet corner at home, the music seemed to lift her, even when her body was weary. Finally, the night of the open stage arrived. The community center was buzzing with excitement. Families, neighbors, and a handful of local music enthusiasts filled the room. Some had performed before, some had come just to listen. The stage was simple, with a single spotlight and a well-worn piano. She stood backstage, clutching her sheet music, her heart hammering in her chest. She felt small, insignificant even, compared to the bright lights and the murmuring crowd. But she reminded herself of the cafe, of the plate of food, of the warm smiles. That had been a small victory. Tonight could be bigger. When her name was called, she stepped forward slowly, each step echoing in the quiet hall. The audience looked at her with polite curiosity, but there was no skepticism in their eyes yet. She sat at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys. For a heartbeat, she froze. What if she made a mistake? What if she wasn't good enough? The fear pressed down on her, but she pressed it aside. Remembering the feeling of music flowing through her in the cafe, she started with a soft, simple melody, a song that carried her story without needing words. The notes filled the room, delicate at first, almost hesitant, and then gaining strength, warmth, and confidence. The audience shifted in their seats, drawn in, listening to a story told entirely through music. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her soul, a piece of the struggle, the hunger, and the quiet determination that had kept her moving forward. As the song grew, she felt something incredible. The music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone listening. She could feel the room leaning in, hearts opening, imaginations stirring. For the first time, she realized that talent wasn't just about skill, it was about connection. She had connected with strangers, and it was a beautiful, fragile thing. By the time the final notes echoed into silence, the room was still. The kind of silence that makes you hold your breath because you are afraid to break it. And then, applause. It started slowly, hesitantly, but quickly grew into a wave. People were standing, clapping, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. She looked up, astonished, cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The applause wasn't just for her playing. It was for the courage it took to stand there, for the story behind the music, for the hope she carried in every note. She stood, bowing slightly, unable to speak because her voice was swallowed by emotion. After the performance, people came up to her. Some offered kind words, some asked how she had learned to play like that. One older woman even asked if she had considered taking lessons formally, if she wanted to study music more seriously. For the first time, she imagined a life beyond survival, beyond the streets and the hunger. A life where her music could be her way forward, a way to connect, to inspire, to grow. In the days that followed, things began to change. Small opportunities started appearing, invites to perform at local gatherings, offers to practice at music studios that had spare pianos, even the possibility of scholarships or mentorships. She didn't know exactly where the path would lead, and some days were still hard. Hunger didn't disappear overnight, and worry still visited in quiet moments. But now, there was hope, a guiding light she could reach for. The young girl spent hours practicing, refining her melodies, and exploring new compositions. Her confidence grew, not just in her playing but in herself. She learned that talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, patience, and courage were just as important. And she discovered the joy of sharing her gift with others, of seeing eyes light up, of feeling hearts move with the music she created. One afternoon, as she played a simple tune in a small studio, a man approached her. He introduced himself as a local music teacher, someone who had heard about her from the community center performance. He offered to help her improve her technique, to teach her advanced pieces, and to guide her in preparing for bigger stages. She hesitated at first, afraid of committing too much, afraid of the unknown. But then she thought of the cafe, the plate of food, the first applause that had made her heart soar. She nodded, accepting the offer, a mixture of nervousness and excitement stirring inside her. Months passed, and the young girl's life slowly transformed. Each day was still a challenge, but now, every challenge was met with determination rather than fear. She practiced diligently, performed whenever she could, and started building a small following of people who admired her music and her story. The world felt bigger, not intimidating, but full of possibilities waiting to be discovered. Through it all, she never forgot that first day in the cafe, the moment she had sung for a meal and discovered that her music could reach people in ways nothing else could. That moment had planted a seed of courage, and now it had grown into something remarkable. She realized that even in the smallest acts, even in moments of need and uncertainty, there was the potential for greatness. Her journey was far from over. There were still obstacles, doubts, and moments of loneliness. But she had learned that life could offer unexpected opportunities, that kindness and attention could come from the most unlikely places, and that the courage to take a small step could lead to extraordinary transformations. And so, she continued to play, to dream, and to grow. Each note she pressed carried the memory of hunger, struggle, and hope. Each melody told a story, not just of music, but of resilience, courage, and the power of believing in oneself. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone with her piano, she would sometimes smile softly, remembering the first plate of food, the applause in the cafe, and the simple truth she had discovered, that the gift she carried inside her could not only fill her own heart, but could touch the hearts of others, inspiring them in ways words could never fully express. And as the sun rose on another day, she looked toward the future with cautious optimism, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the music within her was not just a talent, it was a lifeline, a bridge, and a beacon guiding her forward. It had started with a song for a meal, but it had become so much more, a journey of discovery, courage, and hope. And though she had only just begun, she understood one truth that would carry her forever, no matter how small or uncertain life might seem. A single act of bravery, a single moment of sharing one's heart, could change everything.